So the next thing we would like to do is create a few more objects and add them to a scene. We're only going to have the one scene, and if we wanted to create levels where we could move from one puzzle to the next, for example, or one location to another, we could create subclasses of this world. I'm not going to go that far here though, so I'm only going to be creating the one setup for all the 3D objects that are going to show up in the game, and we're only going to have the one area where the player will move around in. So there is possibility to try to take this a little further. It's one of the great things about object-oriented programming. Uh, and I've got the three import statements similar to what we have in player.java. We can start creating more instances of boxes. We want one big one that's flat to go underneath where the player is to act as the ground. It's not going to do anything other than just place that object where we want it. We would likely want the functionality to do this many times though, so that means we should write some kind of method. I'm going to do this private because I only want the world to have control over where objects are placed. And I don't think we're going to be returning anything. Oh. We could just be adding things to the root. But I'm wondering here for access to objects later, if we want to get reference to any objects, like the ground that we're going to create, if we want to get access to things like that later and move them around. I think for now, I'm not going to worry about getting access to those references, and we could build up and make our code more complex later. So for now, I'm not going to return anything. We'll do create platform, I think, to start with. I'm not going to have any parameters to start with. So create a new box. And I'm going to pause and come back. Okay, this is where things are going to be a little bit more complex as we continue moving forward. So to get the functionality for moving the cube, I want to be able to see the cube as we move it in order to make good progress without trying to do more guesswork. But that means we're going to have the camera shift around, and so we'll have a camera object created. It looks something like this. I'm creating a perspective camera object. We've got it managed by the world class. I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis so that we can see from a view above the scene and have the ground below with objects in between. And I want to shift the camera back so that way we can see the objects closer to the origin. This way, because originally I had the cube and the player set up so that the X position and the Y position moved somewhere towards the center of the window. I don't want to have to think about shifting things over in my entire scene and all of the other objects I'm going to create. I like to create things without as much translation as possible to shift things around. So the player's going to start near the origin, but they have to be above the floor. The y-axis is points positive going down, which is a bit weird. So doing minus 25 will move the player above the floor. Okay, and then the player, I just changed the constructor so that we're passing in x, y, z values for the position of where it will start. And I've got those values assigned right away at the beginning of the constructor. I've added a method so that we could change the location once we process key presses for the arrow keys we could then use this method to set the location in different positions. I'm going to also have objects moved, maybe by animation, so the player position might change on its own later. We would likely want a collection with many objects. We might be moving many different things. We'll have the update method in general, so we're probably going to have this kind of method for every kind of other object we would want interacting with the player as well. And then in a collection back in our main program, we'll have this set up as an interface, so that way we are guaranteed to have this method for the objects in the collection. And so we'll call the update near the end of all the actions in our game loop. Then we'll get there a little bit later. But right now I want the update method to change the position. We might update that position by setting the location. We'll have the update method for access later. So we're not quite there yet. In the app, there's a bit of a bug once we've got a camera set up. We have our subscene like before, and then we need to set the camera. But as soon as we do that, there's a bug corresponding to the background. If we want to have a gradient, it shifts things over. So I'll show you that bug really quick. Uncomment it and try to have it like we did before. It doesn't quite do the gradient properly. And I was looking up, current issues with JavaFX, and it looks like the developers still have issues with combining the 3D scene together with the gradient in the background. So I'm just going to leave it out for now. It's not essential that we have the blue sky. And then what we really want to get at is setting up the behavior for gameplay. So I'm just going to keep it commented out. It's not an issue that I want to debug and try to figure out how to get around the developers' bugs. I'm going to leave that off. So the next thing will be processing with key presses for arrow keys so we can move the player. Okay, we've got functionality working. I tried a couple things and it took me a while after looking at two-dimensional objects that I didn't realize were stuck in 2 dimensions for path transitions, trying to figure out how to do shifting the box. So translate transition, this is what I was originally looking for too, so it kind of annoyed me. I'm like looking up in the documentation. I know it's probably going to be this name. I didn't see it right away. You would also expect to see the same kind of arguments for setting up the rotate transition. So I'm only going to want to move the box maybe about 2 seconds. And I just got it working and it feels like it's a little bit slow for that. So maybe I'll do 0.5 seconds. We'll see how that goes. And then that's the object we're going to animate, so get avatar, that would be the same. It has some strange methods for moving. I thought it was going to be creating other objects and then adding it to describe maybe multiple positions we would move it to for the animation if we're going to translate. But it looks like we've got set by Z, so I'm moving along the Z axis. Positive Z direction will be away from the camera. Or not away from the camera, but we haven't moved the camera too much from the world space coordinates. So the Z axis direction that we're moving along the world, that roughly aligns with the perspective on the camera that we have. They're still aligned on the Z axis. We haven't angled rotating around the box at all, other than to look slightly higher above it. So this will be corresponding to the same coordinates in the world right now as well. We're not aligning the translate for this animation to be any different from the world. And then we go ahead and play that. Let's see What else might we have? I had to set things up so that the key handler could access moving the player, so it can call this method. And that's only doing a translation for where the box currently is. It's not updating px, py, pz. So the other thing we should do, even though it's animating it, we should right away update pz to be equal to the current pz. So that way it matches wherever we're going to move the actual object or the node inside of our scene. We wouldn't want to work with constants like this everywhere, where I have plus equal 50, set by z 50, and then we've got our box size 50, 50, 50. So what I'd want to do instead I'm going to have it as double and size. And I'm going to set it to 50. Okay. And then down here, we'd want to move by that amount. I think that should be good. The data manager hasn't really changed. The world hasn't really changed. We've still got the camera set up the way it is. The app, we wanted to make sure that when we create a new key handler, we've only got the one. We're not keeping a handle or a reference on the key handler either. We're just passing it in so that we can have user interaction. I don't think we're ever going to need to change that. So we've only got the reference that we're passing in to our scene. In the key handler, we've got a new constructor, a default. Once we create a new constructor like this that has parameter set up to pass in a data manager like this, it means we don't have a default constructor anymore. So if we wanted one, we'd have to create another constructor with no arguments or no parameters. I'm just setting up the data manager so that way you can get access to it later. Again, we're only working with the singleton. There's only the one object reference that we're passing around to everything like this. So we have access to it. The code that I'm looking for, just to check that things are working okay, is once we press the arrow key up on our keyboard, whatever the code is for the event that happens, we would check that it matches with keycode up. That's coming again from the documentation. Keycode.up, if I wanted to know what that was, I'd go back to my documentation, I'd look at typing in keycode, and then up at the top I've got keycode, and scroll down. There's so many that I would press Control F and look for left, or sorry, up. I mean, there's a lot of matches, so we've got a channel up, but I'm guessing that the one we want is going to be listed really far down because alphabetically U comes close to last, so I'm assuming that's the way they've ordered it. Maybe further down here somewhere. Maybe it's going to be a bit harder to find than I thought. Let's see, up. Okay, so it looks like the alphabetical ones are listed in this first section around here. And this is the constant for the non-numpad up arrow key. So that's just on the bottom right hand corner of my regular keyboard. If you wanted to work with the numpad arrow keys, maybe that's your preference, you might look for that, and it would be one of these other key codes listed. So that's one of the enum constants that I know I've got. And I can access it statically through keycode, like we usually do with an enum. It's a constant, like we have with enums. So that code, it's passed in as a key event. I can grab the code, store it in my key code, and then start to write. What I would really do if I had a lot of different functionality for different key presses on the keyboard, instead of doing an if condition and then uh, a block to take care of different conditions depending on what the key code value is, I'd be changing this to a switch later. So a switch construct would make a little bit more sense based off of the different values we might have for key code. And then we call from the data player our moveback method that we've got. So that's going to be doing the animation. Let's take a look at all this. Of course, there's some imports that we have to do with these different objects that we're using from JavaFX library. And I think after this video, I'll be uploading the new version of all this code because I realize there's quite a lot of adjustments that we made from the beginning. So we've got our box now, size 50. It just keeps doing the default rotation that we've got to check things are working. And then if I push the arrow key up, you can see that it shifts it back. And I'll probably do it again and again. I can move the box off the screen. So now we can start to get some functionality beyond that, where we'll keep this output statements about which keys we're pressing to standard out. We'll keep that for a while because the behavior of our game, as we make more functionality and user interaction, we'll want that just to see what's going on. Eventually we're going to get to the point where we're confident in the processing and handling of key events, where we won't need that output anymore. And I'm looking forward to maybe we'll do a couple more videos tomorrow. I'll have an earlier in the morning. Movement around the floor of the game scene. We'll want collisions to check the bounds for the floor. I'm not going to be doing anything more complex like physics. And I'm likely going to want just the main player, that's the red box. We would have it a bit smaller and then the floor a bit larger. And we can shift the box around to try to navigate probably around some other boxes. And I'm not going to be doing a lot more than that because I realize we don't have a lot of time. Okay, I'll be posting the new version of the code for the end of the day today, and I hope you have fun playing around with it.